"2020 has been a crazy year so far, and that showcases in the gaming landscape for this year. Games are being delayed, releasing only digital, and leaked before they were ever released. We haven't had a full Nintendo Direct since September of last year, and currently there are no plans for a Direct this year, with the current virus situation making it hard for Nintendo to work normally on games. We know very little about the rest of the year and what it looks like for Nintendo, but we did get a surprise announcement of a new Paper Mario game on Twitter, and that's probably how we will get an announcement for the rest of this year's games. So what does this leave for The Legend of Zelda? There have long been rumors that Nintendo wants to release a new Zelda game every single year. Eurogamer reported back in 2018 that Nintendo is keen to have a Zelda game launch on the Switch every year. Eurogame was the first to correctly predict the Nintendo Switch, so I believe their sources when it comes to Nintendo. And if you take a look, Nintendo has followed this trend since 2013. Let's take a look at how Nintendo has released Zelda games over the past decade. Starting back in 2011, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time 3D was released for the Nintendo Switch. This was the first major Zelda release of the decade. In 2012, there were no major releases for The Legend of Zelda, but we did get the two original Zelda games on the 3DS Virtual Console. 2013 marked the release of The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, and the first game to start the new Zelda game every year trend. We also got The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker HD for the Wii U in 2013. This was not all for this year though. Nintendo also released several games through the 3DS and Wii U Virtual Consoles. 2014 was a different year than usual, but we did see a new Zelda game released. 2014 brought Hyrule Warriors for the Wii U, the first spin-off of the decade. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask was then released in 2015 for the Nintendo 3DS, making the second Legend of Zelda remake to be released for the 3DS. Triforce Heroes was also released in 2015 along the 3DS, but let's forget about that one. Lastly, in 2015, we got the release of Ocarina of Time on the Wii U Virtual Console. 2016 was the release of the second HD port on the Wii U in The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, and then we saw Hyrule Warriors Legends released for the 3DS, and the DS Zelda games were ported to the Wii U Virtual Console. In 2017, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild alongside the Nintendo Switch, and later that year we got two DLC packs for Breath of the Wild. 2018 brought the third time that we have seen Hyrule Warriors. This time it was brought to the Switch as a definitive edition game, as well as the original two Zelda games were released for the Switch Online service. 2019 year was another year with multiple releases, with The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening releasing for the Switch, and Cadence of Hyrule, a spin-off created by Brace Yourself Games, was released for the Nintendo Switch as well. In late 2019, we got The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past added to the Switch Online service. And that brings us to 2020. Currently, we have no announcements for a Zelda game in 2020 and no rumors about one planned to be released. As you can tell, Nintendo has been keen on releasing Zelda games in some form every year for almost a decade now. Does that mean something will get announced for this year? I'm not sure. Usually, by now, we would have already been told about a new Zelda game. Link's Awakening for the Switch was announced in February of last year for a September release. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition was announced in January of 2018 for a May release, so it is possible that we can get a Zelda spin-off game or a port announced over the summer for a release only 4 or so months later. I doubt we will get a new Zelda game or remake this year. Typically, Nintendo likes to announce a new Nintendo game months in advance, allowing for the correct marketing, and it seems very unlikely that Breath of the Wild 2 will be releasing this year. So what does that leave us for 2020? Well, if we aren't getting a new Zelda game like Breath of the Wild or a remake like Link's Awakening, then that leaves two likely options: a port of an older game like Skyward Sword, or possibly one or both of the Wii U games. We could also get a spin-off in vein of Cadence of Hyrule or Hyrule Warriors. We haven't heard any rumors about another spin-off on the horizon, so unless they surprise us all, that one doesn't seem that likely in the moment. That leaves us with ports. I would be okay with this given the landscape of the world right now with the virus. I think a port would be the easiest thing for Nintendo to achieve, and Skyward Sword desperately needs to be ported on modern hardware. I've already made a video on why Skyward Sword coming to the Switch is likely. The video is linked down below. If they decided to port the HD games from the Wii U, I would be okay with this as well. A lot of people have been asking for this, and Nintendo has been actively rescuing all of its games from the Wii U by adding them to the Nintendo Switch. So, as you can see, Nintendo has in fact been releasing Zelda games every year for a while now, making it pretty likely that we will see some sort of Zelda release before the year is over. What do you think will happen? Anything you're hoping for? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep the legend going.